Good morning, everybody, and thank you for spending your time with us this morning. I'm glad Brenda started off talking about tax increment financing. I've been writing about that for years, as she said, and actually Graham and I have been working on this paper for about 2 years, on and off. And I feel like I have to start these talks with an observation that the Show Me Institute is often caricatured as just being against all taxes, and that's not true. Certainly, it's not something that I believe is true. The power of taxation is important, and it ought to be respected. And the case in tax increment financing and with special taxing districts is the legislature and the governing bodies around the state, I think, don't respect the power. And what's happening with special taxing districts is they are giving the power to tax away to other people who are then using it for their own private gain. But I just want to make that statement up front, that this isn't about all taxes are bad. It's that taxes are powerful and they ought to be respected. So what are special taxing districts? Special taxing districts are political subdivisions that are created around the state that levy a sales or a property tax to deliver a specific improvement or services. And again, in theory, this seems like a very good idea, especially for people who like small and local government. You've got an immediate need in an area, well, why not tax the people who live in that area to provide that service? Unfortunately, in practice, they have mushroomed, and it is increasing the sales taxes and the property taxes that Missourians across the state pay. The rest of this presentation will focus largely on two types of special taxing districts: CIDs, Community Improvement Districts, and TDDs, Transportation Development Districts. Since 1997, they have grown from from 1 to over 600. And I just want to point out, we're not alone in this. The state auditor, Nicole Galloway, has studied a number of CIDs and TDDs and has come away with the view that really the legislature is allowing self-dealing. A lot of these organizations aren't transparent, and of course they don't have any approval from voters in the first place. So this isn't just us, well, we may be screaming into the void, but it's not just us doing it. And then all the material I discuss in this presentation is available in our paper. When I did a run-through with my colleagues in Kansas City, they said some of the charts they couldn't see. I tried to improve that, but don't feel that you have to remember everything that I talk about this morning, because we've got it in print. So why might you adopt a special taxing district? Well, the first thing might be you've got a need, perhaps a water district that crosses over several different municipalities. And maybe those municipalities don't get along very well, or getting them to share resources is too much of a hassle. So what you might do is just sit a special taxing district on top of them to handle that specific need. Or you may have a very specific or small area, such as a shopping center, that you want to focus your resources on. And then, of course, an existing financial government may not have the funds to provide that. I think part of this explains why we saw CIDs crop up after the Great Recession. But those are the reasons why a special taxing district might be attractive. And again, some of the kinds of district, you'll be familiar with ambulance districts and fire protection districts. And again, these are organizations that collect a fee to provide a specific service in a specific area. There are approximately, well, just under 1,900 unique special taxing district financial reports with the state auditor's office. But the problem is that there is no one organization that collects these. I found out while reading about this that although the law required that transportation development districts file an annual report in the 90s when the TDDs were collected, there was no penalty for not doing so until 2016. So a lot of them just didn't. And why would you? It's extra work and there's no penalty. So a lot of this, I think, is just going to be cleanup work, making sure that these organizations file regularly, that they file in a consistent manner, and that there's one agency that oversees those filings. And again, created in the 1990s, CIDs and TDDs have grown in number over 600, and the overwhelming majority of them were not subject to any public votes. So in 2018, the Tax Foundation reported on the number of special taxing jurisdictions around the country. They counted just under 1,400 in Missouri. We were second only to Texas in the United States. So we are 18th in population and second in special taxing jurisdictions. And the problem with a lot of these is they don't necessarily include all the ones that we talk about today. So they don't include the sales taxes of CIDs and TDDs. But again, this is a problem, and it's not just us talking about it. So this is really, the devil's in the details, and here's the devil. How you create these things. Oftentimes what a developer might do to apply for a CID or a TDD is just draw a red circle around their shopping center on a map. And then based on how many people live within that district, that proposed district, you have a vote. If nobody lives in that district, there's no vote, and the shop owners or the developer herself creates the district, appoints the board, and then decides what projects they're going to pay. In TDDs, you have to have at least 50 people unless nobody lives in the district, in which case it goes right to what a CDD does. The developer herself can propose a district, cast a single vote, approve its revenue sources and projects, and appoint and elect the board of directors. And that is what's happening in majority of the cases. You may remember this from Columbia a few years ago. It made me laugh. They wanted to create a CID. They drew a map around, they drew a circle around the map and said, well, the developer will just be able to create this, and it turned out there was one woman living in the district who had the sole vote. So that was a problem. It turned out that there were actually 14 people who lived in the district. The district passed 4-3, 7 of them voted. I can imagine the amount of lobbying that went on those 14 people must have been epic. But it was voted 4-3 in favor, and it's been in court ever since. It appears that there are some law school professors in Columbia who have decided that they want to make some hay. And so the local judge had for a number of years refused to even make a decision until the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to issue a decision. And the judge's decision, if I remember correctly, was basically, she dismissed the case, and she said that you can't sue on election laws against a CID creation because really election laws don't apply. And that's what the developers, like this is an election, it doesn't specify in the CID laws what the election ought to look like and how it ought to be undertaken. I think the problem was it wasn't a blind ballot. People knew how they voted. But the point is, this is a problem, and there are legal problems with it, and Columbia seems to be a good example of what can go wrong. This is Ward Parkway Mall in Kansas City, where I live. It's right on the border with State Line, and again, you can see the developer, well, I mean, I drew that circle, but the developer just puts a circle around the shopping center, creates the CID, collects a 1% sales tax in this case. And Ward Parkway isn't the worst example. They've used that CID money to refurbish the outside of the building, to improve the lighting in the parking lot and the parking lot itself. But even in those situations, the auditor looked at their CID in December 2017 and said, look, there are some real questions here about who's getting the money and if there's any kind of oversight. And again, this is one of the better examples. And as I talked about in the beginning, what special taxing districts really do is they privatize the ability to tax. They take the government's necessary and powerful power to tax and give it to developers who use it then for their own private gain. 2/3 of CIDs and almost all TDDs impose sales or sales and use taxes. The majority of the spending is the result of one group or entity, again, developers, that are taxing shoppers and using the money themselves. They shift the cost of development to taxpayers, and a recent report says that the developers are controlling over half of the CIDs. Now, what people who are fans of these special taxing districts will say is, Patrick, if you don't want to pay the 1% CID, just don't shop there. Right? Shop across the street. You've got absolute freedom to decide where you spend your money, and that's a compelling argument. The problem is I don't necessarily know, right, the tax rate of where I'm going. You and I may spend some time online trying to find out where the cheapest dress shirt is, for example. I drove out on Black Friday in a half hour to save $30 on dress shirts. But I spent some time researching that, but I didn't research what the taxes were. I generally know that taxes in Kansas are higher than they are in Missouri in some cases, but I don't really know, like across the street from one another, what the taxes are going to be. And although the TDD law requires that a notice be put at the point of sale, it doesn't happen, right? The auditor went through and examined this and found that people don't do it. So what you're getting is you and I are going out and shopping, we're paying taxes, and the taxes are being used by developers. Now, if the developers just needed more money and just raised the cost of their product, right, they could do it that way. But I think what they want to do is be able to hide the price in the tax, and I think they don't have to report income taxes on the taxes they collect, right? If they sell me a dress shirt at $10, they've got to pay a tax on that sale. If they charge it $10 but a higher sales tax rate, I don't know that they have to declare the taxes that they charge me on that.
Are these districts subject to the Sunshine Law?
So that depends. Some of them that are created as political subdivisions are. Some of them are created as nonprofits, and they are not. And it is difficult. I mean, I've sunshined some, and some will say, well, here's some information, but we withhold the rest. But just the number of them, I think the auditor did this, submitted a number of sunshine requests to CIDs, and just a large number of them just didn't respond. And it may be, for example, that they've closed or they've stopped collecting funds, but they're still on the books, and part of it just...
Do they typically have perpetual existence, or are they set up for a fixed term?
Well, so they start off for a fixed project, but they're perfectly capable, especially if the developer controls the board, of saying, well, we've got another project we want to fund. So the law doesn't stipulate that they have to end or be re-approved in 10 years. And again, if the developer is the only person approving them, that's kind of that's a meaningless standard, a meaningless rule. So here are just the number of CIDs that have grown since 2009. And we hypothesize that what happened after the Great Recession is that a lot of communities found that they didn't have the resources, or that their tax revenue was too subject to the whim of the local economy. And that may be the reason why they increased over time. The amount of money they're collecting is $40 million in just the past few years around the state. And again, like I said, they're formed as political subdivisions, are required to file annual reports, but those are often incomplete, or they don't submit them at all. And the sales tax and use revenue over a 10-year period, the tax collections have grown by more than 1,100%. So this is something that is starting to hit us in the pocketbook around the state. So one of my favorite examples, the Intercontinental Hotel in Kansas City. It's right there on the plaza. If you've been to Kansas City, it's a very nice hotel. It's valued at $28 million in 2017. They wanted to do several $1 million worth of renovation. So they drew a red line around themselves, declared themselves a community improvement district, and then went and sought a blight finding, because if they have a blight finding and a CID, they can explicitly spend the money on private, private needs within the business. And their conditions underlying the blight claim were torn wallpaper, stained carpet, worn bathroom finishes. Again, you and I might say, look, that's wear and tear. Literally, it's wear and tear. This is the price of doing business. This is what you should pay for yourself. But we have created a system where they are allowed to go to the taxpayer. And I imagine in a very competitive hotel industry, especially on the plaza, they don't want to increase their rates, right? So their rates remain the same, but they sock you with a tax when you check out. And by the way, when all the other hotels in Kansas City found out that the Intercontinental Hotel was doing that, they said, we can do that? And now they all want to do that. And in fact, we don't often agree with the Kansas City Star, but they snapped out of their stupor here and said, we need a moratorium on this. TDDs are a similar story. They have risen dramatically. In Kansas City, our streetcar is funded, I'll use air quotes, funded by a TDD that is collecting sales tax and a special assessment. And by the way, a special assessment means you can tax a nonprofit organization. There are churches, that's not a property tax, but they are levied a special assessment to help pay for the streetcar. And so it's growing. And again, why wouldn't it? If you're a developer, you'd be a fool not to ask for this. It's easy, you control it, and no one seems to be looking over your shoulder. The revenue for the same, it's jumped roughly 500% in the last 10 years or so. The Show Me Institute Kansas City office loves the Chick-fil-A in Columbia on our way back, and they have posted a sign at their cash register saying that they charge a 1% sales tax. But this apparently is a rarity. When the auditor went through and looked at a number of taxing districts, she did not find this sign.
What's the size of that sign?
So, thank you, that's a good question. So this little thing here you see is the neck of the screen, right? So I'm at the counter buying, they've got a computer screen here, so maybe the sign's that big down here on the counter. What was that, 5 inches by 4 inches? You know, something else about that. So when you buy gas, right, all the taxes are included in the price, and the price is posted prominently above the gas station, but we don't do that with other services. I was told once, this is completely anecdotal, that gas stations weren't actually allowed to tell you how much the state tax is, how much the federal tax is, how much of your gas gallon is actually a tax. But we don't do that with other things. And I understand a clothing store or a food store sells different things, but yeah, why not on the menu have a column for the tax? I mean, it's no worse an idea than nutritional content. So Ballpark Village, everyone's favorite developer boondoggle. So not only did they get money for the development, but they levied both a TDD and a CID at 1% each. And of course, they were also blighted, despite being assessed at $45 million. And again, this is really kind of the reason why we're talking about this, is because it's one more thing that's pushing up the cost of living in Missouri. I think I've got it on one of these slides, but years ago, Governor Nixon referred to Missouri as a low-tax state. Of course, it made us at the Show Me Institute go crazy, because although the taxes that the Missouri legislature and the governor may oversee might be low, but they've handed the keys to the kingdom off to cities and developers now who are pushing up the taxes on their own. So again, it would be great if we said, let's develop a tax policy that applies equally all over Missouri to all Missourians, and then leave it alone. But we don't do that, right? We play with it in fits and starts. Some people pay more, some people pay less, and you can save a lot of money sometimes by just crossing the street out of a CID. Yes, sir?
Well, we have a sort of a popular tax here that goes to the art museum, the zoo,
Yep.
and the zoo is going out now for another one. That's part of these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah, so we just went, I mean, in some places, you're paying near 12% sales tax in St. Louis, and that doesn't even include if you're going out for a meal. You're paying some of these, but if you're at a restaurant in these districts, your sales tax may be 13%.
But the museum and the museum tax is included in this?
So the museum tax in some places is a property tax. A lot of TDDs or CIDs will just charge a property tax. And actually, that's the least bad of the two options, because then you're taxing the people in the district. Now, if they want to pass that tax on to you, the consumer, they're doing it in the price of their goods. I think that's more fair. But doing it on a tax that you don't realize until you're walking out the door is I think, abusive of the tax policy. And there are examples in Kansas City as well where we're not quite where you are yet. And then Springfield, and this is one of the heartbreaking things about this, is it's bad in Kansas City and St. Louis, but it's getting worse around the state too. I think as developers figure out, like, I learned a trick in St. Louis, and let me show you how we can do this in Springfield. Overall, again, this is just a death by 1,000 cuts. Our tax rates are going up, our cities are becoming less competitive in Missouri, and we are, I think, chasing people out. And it's because everybody, you know, the legislature is focused on their part and the cities are focused on their part, but we're kind of letting developers and private interests run away with the show. And they're increasing taxes. And again, I get it from a developer's point of view, a lot, which is true with a lot of these economic development subsidies. You'd be a fool not to apply for them. It's too easy to get and to keep. And my colleague Mike Podgorski wrote a paper about this exact point, not necessarily CIDs, but just saying that our cities are less competitive and we're not keeping people in Missouri. So what to do? We think that the law should require public votes of people in the area, not necessarily people just in the taxing district. We would like to see perhaps the rescinding the use of sales taxes at all. Again, if they want to charge a property tax to their members, to the other shop owners, that's great. We understand they'll pass that cost on to the consumer, but at least it'll be in the price of the goods and not the tax. We'd like the auditor or the Department of Economic Development or Revenue, Missouri Highway Transportation Commission, somebody should have to compile all these things. They should have to report comprehensively and in some standard, maybe the GASB, the standard that local governments do in Missouri. And local jurisdictions should review and approve expenditures like they do with other taxes. And they should be able to shut them down after a number of years. Maybe if a CID is going to be formed, it should be formed to address a particular discreetly described project, and when that project is done with, it should be up for either be closed or at least have a new vote required. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for your time and attention.